welcome to our panel discussion today. The title of this panel discussion is Digital Engineering as an Acquisition Weapon System. And the thesis of this panel discussion is that digital engineering is enabling faster acquisition, but only where it replaces legacy processes, enforces data interoperability, and is tied to mission outcomes. Otherwise, it risks becoming parallel overhead. And so today we're going to be talking about the United States Department of War and acquisition. That's really the baseline of this discussion. Now, the United States Department of War does not have an acquisition problem. It has a speed problem. And while our adversaries compress the timeline from concept to capability, the Department of War fields many systems on decades-long cycles, often delivering exquisite platforms that are obsolete on arrival. Digital engineering changes that equation. It is not a process improvement or an efficiency play. It is a weapon system in its own right, one that determines how fast our nation can design, adapt, and field combat power. So in an era where advantage is measured in iteration speed, the side that engineers, tests, and evolves faster will not just out-innovate its adversaries, it will outfight them. Now, digital engineering is now embedded into policy, from DODI 5000.97 to Department of War guidance. But policy doesn't deliver capability, execution does. So the working thesis for today's discussion is straightforward. Digital engineering is accelerating acquisition, but only where it replaces legacy processes, enforces interoperability, and is tied directly to mission outcomes. Everywhere else, it risks becoming additional overhead. So today we're going to test that thesis using real programs, real outcomes, and real friction. And today I'm very pleased that we are joined by three leaders who have operated at the center of this shift. First, we have Shawn Purvis, who's the CEO of Sabel Systems, who today are delivering digital engineering environments into active programs. We're also joined by Kim Crider, CEO of Elara Nova and retired Air Force Major General, who was the first Chief Technology and Innovation Officer of the U.S. Space Force, who's bringing to us the senior leadership and strategy perspective. And we also have Dr. Claire Leon, who's a partner at Elara Nova and former member of the Senior Executive Service, who served as Director of the Space Integrations Office at Space Systems Command, who has deep experience in integration and system of systems execution. So thank you all very much for joining us today. So let's get right to it and let's ask a question. I'm just going to answer this question, and then whoever wants to go first, feel free to answer it. Where is digital engineering actually compressing time to fielding today, and by how much? Who wants to go first?
Well, I'm happy to jump in.
Go ahead, Kim.
For you, John, and I'm sure others can offer some additional input. I tell you what, I mean, there are examples. I would say that there are pockets of examples where digital engineering has really proven its worth in both the Department of War programs that we've been executing, as well as in commercial industry. In the Department of War, I think one example that really jumps out, and this is an example on the Air Force side, is with the T-7. It's really the first Air Force aircraft that was designed, built, and tested using fully established digital engineering thread from day one. And that's a really important factor that we'll probably delve into a little bit more as we get into this conversation today. But if you can start a program off, a new start program from day one with digital engineering as the framework by which you're going to design, develop, manufacture, test and manufacture, and then deploy and operationalize a system, you're certainly going to reap the benefits that we want to emphasize here today. So in the case of this particular system, the T-7 Red Hawk, contract award to first flight happened in 36 months. 36 months, right? That was basically taking 5 to 10 years off of, that timeline, which is very significant, savings of multiple years. Of course, there was significant savings in dollars when you can go that fast. And there's also a lot of savings in, the cost associated with engineering change orders that can happen over time. When you're drawing a program out over a lengthy amount of time, you've got a lot of changeovers. If you don't have everything in a digital environment, it's all documented in, essentially paper documents or, very firm kind of electronic documents. It's a lot harder to make those changes on the fly and really understand the impacts of those changes. So that's going to drive some costs. And of course, the biggest benefit that you get from starting with digital engineering and doing the flow has really drives the decision quality that you get sooner and earlier in the process.
Right.
And you can make better decisions sooner. I'll just quickly point out that this approach of using digital engineering to drive competitive advantage is not unheard of. And in commercial industry, we're seeing this in spades, especially when you look at very well-known programs that are known for accelerating and moving very fast. And that one organization would be SpaceX and its Starship
Yep.
program. Digital engineering from the start. I mean, this is how these big companies that move fast and get things done, really live, breathe, and operate. And they do the same thing. It's a digital thread from the very beginning. It's rapid iteration. It's getting away from documents. It's really iterating as you go, learning, speeding up that design and test cycle very quickly because you have all of that digital insight to make better decisions on sooner.
All right. Well, thanks, Kim. So, Shawn, great example from the Air Force. Are there any other examples potentially in Army or other systems?
Yeah, sure. And thanks, General Crider, for that comment. I think absolutely spot on. So certainly in PEO ground, from an Army perspective, the XM30 program, which is the replacement of the M2 Bradley, started digital and stayed digital all the way through milestone B. And I think the example of that one is a great example where you have two new OEM providers coming into a market that the customer is still evolving requirements, right? Which is, to me, really the power of digital engineering, when you can continue to design requirements and understand and test those requirements before you bend metal. But that program started digital, went through PDR and CDR, fully digital. And most importantly, it allowed the customer to understand, as those designs and models came in from those two new competitors, those two new vendors, allowed the customer to understand whether or not they were breaching threshold, and they were making sure that the requirements were actually going to be met by the designs that were coming through, done all in a digital environment. That, what we heard from a customer, what normally would have taken many man hours and many months, was actually done within a week, right? Because you were able to actually see through the digital acquisition environment that was created, you were actually able to see whether or not those requirements were breaching. And I think just adding on to what General Crider talked a bit about is the power of digital engineering. It's not just one platform or one kind of overall concept. It really is the ability to design these next generation platforms and modify as the threat modifies. Because what we do know is that as the requirement document is set some 4, 5, 10 years ago, the threat continues to evolve continually over that time frame. And the ability to design in a digital environment and move and change out either different parts or components or integrate different other effects into those platforms, you're able to see that, model that, simulate that, and understand what the end result would be well before you get to the end of a program or product. The other piece I think we'll talk about throughout today is it's not just on the front end of digital. I think one of the things that we're seeing in the Air Force PLM program is legacy programs that now are coming back through their own version of modernization. And how do you take a legacy program and bring a legacy program into the digital world when it wasn't designed that way, but then able to understand what the next generation of modifications would do to the command and control, to the integration of the rest of the C4ISR environment, and how you can modify in a way that allows the customer to really see the benefit of using digital to be able to do that. And across Air Force PLM, we've brought in over 23 some odd program of records that are out flying in existence to be able to see how we might modernize them for the next generation flight.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Shawn. Claire, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think it's important to reflect on Space Force and the start of Space Force. General Raymond committed to having Space Force be the first, fully digital service. And that message got out to all the PEOs. All the PEOs started prototyping digital engineering capabilities. In missile warning, Raytheon and Millennium, when they went on contract for some studies, they had to deliver digital models that then the government could go analyze how those systems would operate, in an end-to-end sense. But pretty much every PEO has been prototyping and experimenting with digital engineering. I think one of the challenges is doing this at scale and doing this across platforms. So with the stand-up of OTTI and having a fully, the operational test and training infrastructure that goes across all mission areas, then I think we'll start to see, being able to model more end-to-end capabilities. The Space Warfighting Analysis Center, SWAC, has been modeling for a long time and bringing models in from all different systems. And so, they've been, to some level, they get a model, but then they adapt it to their wargaming capability. But we're just starting to see more and more end-to-end integration, higher quality modeling and simulation, and the ability to then analyze end-to-end mission threads. So I think this is a journey. We're not done, but there's lots of hope that we're going to really improve the ability to really understand how systems operate. So when you go from, building something in at a company to actually having it operate, we'll be able to do that much more seamlessly.
Okay, great. Here's another question. Is digital engineering primarily about speed, cost, or decision quality? And which one actually matters most at the program acquisition officer level?
Yeah, I think I kind of touched on that, John. So let me jump in here first. I think I would argue that at the end of the day, it's all about making better decisions earlier in the process, which certainly drives some of those other benefits, speed and cost improvement, speed and cost benefits that you would get. But I really do think that by having access to all of the information that you need about the system, about the design, about the interfaces, about the requirements that it's satisfying, about the impacts of certain features on those requirements, you can make better decisions earlier in the process. And that's going to certainly reduce your technical and integration risk and give you much more confidence as a PEO about where to commit your resources or how to work with your industry partners to get to the best outcome for that particular program. And certainly will enhance speed and cost downstream.
Excellent. Thank you.
I agree with everything General Crider spoke through. I think when we think about speed, we think about designing something that kind of hastily goes out, but that's really not what the power of digital engineering brings, right? It allows you to move through that ambiguity and that integration with a level of assuredness. And I think that's the piece that General Crider is really touching on, that ability to decide when you understand exactly how it's going to work versus the theoretical design, and then we'll see what happens in an exercise or a war game kind of component. In my mind, is the power of the digital engineering kind of landscape across the whole. It's not just on the RDT side, it's not just on the design piece, it is through that integration. And if you can do it in a way where your test also then starts to inform your design, right? You start to actually create a life cycle. When we talk about the digital engineering life cycle, where you're going from ideation into design into production, right? Production into tests, and then test into operation and sustainment. And the idea that if you bring this thing through the entire digital thread, you actually can get to test and sustainment in a way that's not so onerous on the back end. Right. And most importantly, we're designing systems that we want to be fully operational as much as possible, right? And so how do you make sure that you're not caught in supply chain challenges, that you're not caught in early wear challenges, and how does that continue to inform your design for not only that platform but for the next platform? So I think when you really look at it from the entire ecosystem, that entire digital lifecycle solutions that we talk about, that to me is where you get the power. And when you ask the question of what does the customer care about most, I think the customer cares about all of it, no question on that. Our budgets, while they seem huge, they're still limited because there are so many competing resources and needs out there for how and what we are designing and developing and delivering. And so to me, this is about the quality of the dollar and the quality of the spend. And can I take that same $1 that I normally would have done and learn that lesson 4 or 5 years from now? Can I learn that lesson in this year and modify? It's not that you do it one time and you do it right. It's that your ability to be able to have those modifications and then actually ultimately field something that is meaningful and integrates into the warfighting kind of battlefield is much more powerful when you start and use the digital engineering capabilities that are available to us.
Okay, great. Claire?
Well, I don't think you can separate decision advantage, risk reduction, and speed. If you make good decisions early, it will lead to shorter cycle times. If you reduce risk, then you have fewer problems, and that then accelerates the timeline. So I think those are very tightly coupled. I think it's a great question to think about, but anyway, those are all tied together.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, now let's move on and let's pressure test this thesis. Where does the model break? So here's the question for you all. Where does digital engineering potentially fail to accelerate acquisition and why?
So I can start, and I think you've mentioned it already. If you use legacy processes and just put information in a digital environment, you may change nothing. You may have added to your overhead and not actually fundamentally changed. And there's a lot of organizational memory for how we've always done things. And so, I think it is a challenge to really change how you do business to enable those shorter cycle times. But I think there's a lot of enthusiasm in the workforce. And so I think people want to do things differently. But leadership has to kind of lead to and set expectations that I'm only going to give you so much time. So use those digital tools to the advantage to actually accelerate the timelines.
Great, thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think
I'll
just,
add.
oh, please go ahead, General Crider.
Oh, thanks, Shawn. I'll add to what Claire just said, and I just want to unpack this statement that we're making here, John, that you put forward, which is failing when we rely too much on digital processes. And what we're really talking about here, when we think about the digital, when we think about the legacy processes that digital engineering is trying to address and replace, the legacy processes, the legacy engineering processes that we're referring to tend to be very sequential, right? Everything happens one step at a time. There's not a lot of parallel activity that's going on. Certainly we've advanced, our engineering approaches and we start to see some of that, but a more traditional legacy approach is very sequential. It's very document driven. You don't have a lot of iterative feedback loops in the process. If you do have them, they can be very slow and cumbersome. And so that tends to bog down the timelines. There's a lot of fragmentation. There are air gaps. There are communication and collaboration gaps. There's certainly interoperability gaps in those kind of legacy processes. So digital engineering has a hard time when it is just kind of placed on top of those legacy processes, right? It's kind of like the old adage of paving the cow path. Are you really going to get the benefits that you're looking for? You might see some, very small incremental benefits, but you're not going to get the full benefit of the things that we talked about, where you can really have that full end-to-end view. You can really start to make those more effective and efficient decisions sooner. You can drive speed and cost benefits much more comprehensively. If you're still kind of stuck in those fragmented stovepipes, in those sequential processes that are more akin to legacy approaches.
Okay, great input, Kim. Shawn?
I mean, I just echo everything General Crider and Claire both said. I think the challenge across that whole life cycle that we talked about, there's not one platform, there's not one system, there's not one software application that brings you through that whole piece. And so the interoperability to be able to both design with your CAD drawings, et cetera, and then move into an MRO, an MRP manufacturing kind of production environment, move into a test environment, move into a sustainment. Each one of those life cycles represent a whole series of different software applications, processes, and procedures that right now really are not integrated all the way through. And I think that that's a piece that we've seen where you may you may start one piece, or you may have one component, but it breaks when you get to the next model. The other piece that I think that was added on is that if I'm in a digital world, but we want to test in the legacy way that we've been testing, for example, we don't trust the tests coming through the digital simulation, right? If we don't, if we have to certify in the way that we've done the legacy certifications, then you literally can kind of get all of that speed and then stop as you get back into the old processes that are there. And so for sign off and for accreditation and for acceptance and for all of the components that are required in order to really certify platforms that go out and become operational, all of that has to then get caught up, right, from a digital perspective. And I think that that's a piece that we really are still evolving and learning. Even our services that have been doing this for a very long time, you still see kind of that disjointedness across the whole. The last I'd say is the way it's invested now, it's truly invested a lot by those OEM platform providers. And while you may have some of those at the tier 1 level be able to support, they do each have their own unique way about it. They don't necessarily talk one to the other. And then as you get down in the supply chain, tier 2, tier 3, into those unique, again, compartments and composite materials, et cetera, they're not necessarily designing in the same. And so until we really solve the view of how do we make this accessible, right, through the entire ecosystem, so that all the way up through that supply chain, you can see the digital environment being created and then moved across the life cycle. I think we're still going to have a bit of these fits and starts that we've seen across the market.
Oh, all very, very good points. Thank you. Okay, now let's move to the next topic, which is going to be interoperability at the center of gravity. I mean, we've mentioned interoperability a couple of times. So what happens today when multiple vendors bring digital models that don't actually interoperate?
Well, I think, what happens fundamentally, John, and we've touched on this, is without interoperability, the entire digital engineering goal that we have is going to collapse into stovepipes, right? You're going to lose speed and advantage. If you can't get models to talk to each other, you can't get data to move across. Having a seamless shared data environment is another important feature of a digital engineering approach, right? And it moves us away from those legacy processes that we talked about earlier. And Claire touched on this with OTTI, which is a Space Force program that has a digital infrastructure component to it. A really important piece of that digital infrastructure component is a seamless shared data environment across all stakeholders, so that data can be shared and models can be applied to shared data in that end-to-end digital thread, so that as you're moving across from design into development, test, production, that you can see all of the data, work with the data in a much more interoperable way and not fall back into those fragmented stovepipes.
Okay, great. Well, and this kind of leads a question to Claire. Claire, what does an authoritative data environment actually require across multiple contractors?
So I think it's important to consider use cases. There's not one use case, right? So let's go back to the Space Warfighting Analysis Center and wargaming. They have to set the standard for what models they need to do wargaming, right? Those are going to be different models than what a contractor needs to design, build, and test a satellite. So the government, organizations within the government have to define multiple use cases and say, I need this level of fidelity of this model for this application, and then I need a different fidelity or a different model for another application. So if you want to do operator training and how the power system works or how the thermal system works, those are different models than what SWAC wants to use for end-to-end. So the government team has to define those use cases and then ask for the right models from industry, delivered in the right format at the right level of fidelity to be able to execute those use cases.
Yep, absolutely. So Shawn, are you seeing is industry aligned, or are we still seeing a fragmented ecosystem?
Yeah, I think the challenge that we've got is that it is fragmented, and it's fragmented really for the statement that I made before, which is right now the requirement comes through, but it comes through and is given to industry as their own individual investment, right? And in general, and we're generalizing this in piece to it. And so the investment is in the millions of dollars, and from an industry perspective, how then do you recoup that? How do you get recognition for that? How does that benefit a company if then all of that investment then just turns over and the next industry, competitor picks it up and takes it to the next phase? I think that's a piece that keeps everyone kind of stovepiped in their lanes. I do believe that there's such opportunity, especially we're going to see this, I deeply believe, with Golden Dome, where the partnership between industry and government, which when I grew up was in my mind much stronger around just getting to mission and really just fielding core capability versus the stake and the claim of all the IP that the individual companies, et cetera, want to do. I think the partnership opportunities with government to say, if we're going to do this, we have to do this in a way that is either in a ICD or interface control that speaks one to the other, where the government can set that baseline, infrastructure, and that's what you design to. So then, therefore, all models can come into an ecosystem that is really owned by the government and speaks the same language one to another, right? Or there's some recognition, true recognition and benefit back to the industry of the investments they're making, because many times those investments are pure play overhead coming out right from an industry perspective across the whole of it. And so when I think about how do we get into a place, again, I'll pick on Golden Dome. Golden Dome is not a clean sheet build. It is going to be a system of systems. It's going to be a modification of existing capabilities, of platforms, and of effects that exist today that now will come together in a multi-domain, right, core capability to be able to meet the threat. And if we're going to do that at speed, industry one to another, industry one to the government, has to be able to do this in a partnership that I think we've really not done in a very long time. But we've shown we can do it when we're faced right in wartime. Right, we've shown as a country we can step up and do that because that's how we respond. So I'm excited about how those things move forward. I will say that right now, there's times when you see and go back now to like really the mechanics of how this works, and Section L and Section M, where you get credit for it, quote unquote credit for it in a proposal. To me, those are the areas that we're going to have to continue to refine and enhance. And a great example is when I ran cyber, back when cyber was emerging. Cyber was not called out at the beginning in Section L and M. And so I would go in and talk about cyber being designed in the beginning, but it wasn't recognized. It wasn't quote unquote scored, if you will, right? And so until it became part of survivability and hardening and resiliency, and those words got added into the actual Section L and Section M of an RFP, we couldn't convince those that were designing that you had to have that all of that built up resiliency, redundancy, costs, right, at the end of the day, built in the upfront. And so everything that we're talking about here, and we talk about speed, and you talk about how do we get the best of the best, there's a cost to that, and whether that's time and cost or extra individuals or et cetera. And I think that from a reducing that fragmentation, there has to be a way that we all benefit one to another on how do we actually take that investment, and that investment comes back and reward across those who are actually both willing to share, but also those that have made that investment to move as fast as possible.
Okay, thank you, Shawn. Okay, back to General Crider. General Crider, if interoperability is the problem, what does leadership actually have to mandate, not just encourage?
Well, first I want to take a step back and foot stomp some of what Shawn said before we get into mandates. I think it's important to establish from the get-go the partnership outcome that you're trying to encourage, right? Industry and government working hand in hand together, and essentially recognizing that you are engineering your approach to apply digital engineering through that
Mhm.
partnership. You really have to think of the, in the large system of systems, and Shawn has a great example here with the Golden Dome vision. It's a large system of systems. Government and industry have to come to that system of systems activity with a mindset of partnering together and with a mindset of, okay, how do we engineer into a way to do this much more efficiently, much more effectively, much more digitally across the board, and think through how to bring in legacy systems and modern systems together into this environment where you're going to want to be able to evolve towards a more complete digital approach. And so I think that is an important key piece of it is the mindset, the partnership, and the emphasis on we're going to work through this together.
Right.
That's number one. Number two, and getting to your very specific question about, well, what does leadership have to mandate? And this is leadership on all sides. But I think that going into that, knowing that we're going to have to come together and there's going to have to be some underlying infrastructure. And the government is going to want to invest in infrastructure that's going to allow industry to come in and be able to present their models, be able to integrate in, be able to interact with the authoritative data environments. The government also has to mandate, here's the infrastructure and here's the authoritative data environment that we're going to have you work with. Or if you do have data that is going to come into this environment, here's how we're going to get to the point of integrating that in. Here are the interoperability standards by which models need to be able to talk to each other and speak the same language. As Shawn said, we need to make it as lightweight as possible for models to interact with each other, for systems to talk to models, for data to talk to systems and models, with minimum translation, with minimum extra steps in the process. So if we work towards those outcomes, we establish, here's the infrastructure baseline that we're working with. Here are the basic fundamental interoperability standards that we're going to apply. And here's the authoritative data environments that we're going to work with. I think we can get there. And we certainly can move faster towards the environment we're going to need to reap all the benefits that digital engineering can provide us.
Oh, thank you very much, Kim. Appreciate it.
If I could just, John, on that,
Yeah, absolutely.
think Crider brought up one of is just a phenomenal point, which is that infrastructure kind of component. You can't put the exquisite model on infrastructure that has been suboptimized, right, for many years. And when we talk about actually this collaboration and partnership, we do need to bring in the Dells and the AT&Ts and the Verizons and the AI components and all of those that actually help enable that technology. If you have a phenomenal core capability, but your actual infrastructure, your pipes, and the ability to actually render kind of what we're talking about doesn't work, it still doesn't work, right? And so I think what General Crider and I are both saying is when we talk about an industry government partnership, it's bringing that whole kind of concept in. And I've seen it in years past where we've done that magnificently. Where the speed of quantum or the speed of the research and development that's going on and moving technology forward, infrastructure forward, instead of being done to try and reduce costs, it's done to actually enable. And General Crider made that mindset of when you start with that mindset shift, it's completely game changing in my mind of how you can move this forward.
So it really is a quite a large ecosystem. It's not an application. It's not a software. It's not a process. It's infrastructure. It's software. It's people. It's all of the above. Okay, excellent. All right, well, let's change the topic a little bit here. We've been talking about platforms and systems of systems, but we always hear this term mission thread. So let's talk about mission threads versus platforms. And we're seeing a shift from platform acquisition language to mission threads. So the question to all of you, what decisions get faster when you model a mission thread instead of a platform?
I guess I'm not sure what gets faster. I think what the importance of modeling mission threads is to verify or to design end-to-end capability. The main area that I was familiar with in my Space Force job was contested space and sensor to shooter. So, what information are you getting that says you have a problem, and then where does the data flow through all of the different systems? And it can be integrating an MDA system, other mission partners, SSC systems from multiple PEOs. And then, if you actually have a shooter, it could be, a whole nother service. So understanding all of those, interfaces and how data flows is just critical to being able to execute that mission thread. So far it hasn't been very fast, because a lot of this we're designing as we go, and we're having to fix systems where there isn't interoperability, there isn't an interface that works. So you have to go change something, and it's one contractor to a different contractor, and somebody's got to change. But it's finding those gaps and then fixing those gaps. So it's creating that end-to-end capability. I think as you do this more and more, then you can get faster at executing, designing, executing, finding, closing gaps. You can get a lot faster at that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Claire.
I think Claire's exactly right. The Air Force and the Space Force both have, have had this goal of, digitizing mission threads for a while. And then, having that digital mission thread be a way to understand, here are the trades that I'm going to make to get to, maximum mission outcomes. And those trades might fall into, okay, if I have more of these kinds of systems, or if I incorporate this new technology or this new innovation into my mission thread, what's that going to do to drive my mission outcomes? And so it's not necessarily getting to a decision faster. It's making a different kind of decision. It's a decision oriented around, how do I optimize mission outcomes? And it has the same sort of underlying premise that if I digitize the mission thread, if I digitize the end-to-end steps and activities that go on within a specific mission, that is going to lead me to a mission outcome. And then I can see through my digital process all of the platforms and systems and technologies that factor into that, and where the gaps are, I can make better decisions on closing on those so that I can enhance my mission outcomes. I can maybe get to a faster mission outcome or a more efficient mission outcome. So it's just a different kind of modeling and a different kind of digital approach. But something that we see more and more getting emphasized now that digital engineering is, becoming even more realizable, right? Because the technologies are more available to us to get to a digital engineering environment and to deal with some of these legacy processes that we've been talking about. There's more and more emphasis on, how do I drive mission outcomes, right? Not just about optimizing a specific platform or specific system performance, but how do I put that together with other things to get to the mission outcome, which is really my ultimate strategic advantage.
Thank you, Kim. Shawn?
I echo, I think, everything else that General Crider and Claire both said. The reality is that when there's a threat, there's not one service or one platform that can resolve it. And when you bring a mission thread all the way through, you really do realize the multi-domain and multi-int requirements to be able to actually, defeat our adversaries. And I think the ability to have that kind of visualization, it actually requires the pressure, if you will, on all of our services to actually be able to step into a digital domain. Where 10 plus years ago, one service might have been able to say, I'm going to go all digital. Really now everyone has to come in to be able to fight that way and have the threat done that way. And the ability to have that kind of tipping and queuing and see like where I'm going to hand off and where I have the blind spots allows you, again, kind of the beginning of our conversation, then to design not in a silo and not in a one-off effect, but into the actual outcome, as General Crider mentioned and Claire mentioned, to actually design that whole solution across the kill chain for the outcome that you're actually trying to achieve. And a lot of that comes not just from one effect or one aperture. It actually comes from a multi-domain kind of awareness. And that's really where we've evolved from I think a model in the world today, that this is not going to be just one service and it's not going to be just one Intel component. It really does take all of it to be able to defeat the adversary.
And so I think for me, the takeaway, what I'm hearing is really digital and engineering, and in many ways enables mission thread thinking by being able to have access to the data and move it through. So, okay, now last question. So let's close on this. What must change? So the question to each of you are one or two changes that you think are required in the next 24 to 36 months for digital engineering to truly accelerate at scale.
Sure, I can kick it off. I think the first that we would say is it's not an end all to be all, right? The fact that you make this investment and start this investment doesn't mean that we won't have challenges, and doesn't mean that those challenges should be thrown away. To me, when I think about how do we do this, I think we've got to put it in, and we have to start with the mindset that we're going to bring it into physics-based models, right? So these models are not just theoretical. These are able to really model and simulate how it's going to work in theater and command, and then we need to be able to actually use those decisions to modify. And when we talk about acquisition, the challenge I think we get into, that we're all into today, is that if you modify a requirement 18 months, 24 months down the road, in general, it causes a tremendous amount of change, right? Requirement change, control change, and cost change, and time, et cetera. And the idea of being able to use digital to harness that power without all of the contract mechanisms or the kind of, the paralyzation that comes when you're trying to modify something downrange, I think it's something that we as again, both industry and government have to embrace. Otherwise, you lose the power of the fact of really what we're trying to do here, which is, I think I know what I need, but it's not until I actually see it through that mission thread that we just talked about that I need to then kind of modify. And can I modify without harm, right, on schedule to the vendor, to the OEM provider? Can I modify without an inordinate amount of costs being added, right, from a government perspective? Can we actually get to a place where we're designing something that will field and actually meet requirement as the requirement continues to evolve? And so when I think about probably the biggest change, to me, the biggest change there is that ability to have a little bit of the ambiguity, both on both sides, and the flexibility to be able to modify as you go without the kind of rigor that we've created in our acquisition structure today, which is thou shall do.
Yeah.
That shall statement, to change the shall statement, is really hard to change when you get into, especially ACAT 1 programs. So I think that kind of mindset and acquisition and partnership needs to be, and the first time we do it, and in my mind, we should celebrate it, right? We should celebrate it. We should highlight it. We should show it as the best case in class. And I'll end on something that I heard General Crider say when SpaceX had one of their first failures. If you went to the video, they celebrated. I don't know if you remember that. That was, 10 plus years ago. And they said, we learned something, right? We learned, because you do learn from failure in engineering as much as you learn from success. They were as excited about that to be able to modify the next as they were about the mission that was successful. And I think that mindset change is really important if we're going to embrace, the world of digital engineering, which allows us to have that kind of embracement without breaching contracts, et cetera.
Thank you, Shawn. Kim or Claire?
Yeah, I'll build upon that. And, and I do want to emphasize the mindset shift that I think needs to happen, and the partnership that we talked about before. We understand the mechanical changes that need to be made to get a digital engineering environment to work. And I think that the biggest thing that needs to change, and this needs to change, way to the left in the acquisition lifecycle, before we issue an RFP, before we decide here's what we're going to go do, before we start issuing requirements to industry, we need to bring industry in and have a conversation about, here's the concept. We're going to build a system, or we're going to, integrate a system of systems. And we want to do it in a digital engineering way. And we want to do it in a way that industry can actively participate in the digital engineering workflow. And we want to do it in a way that's going to be highly iterative throughout our test process. And we want to do it in a way that we're actually going to lay in mission threads and have that conversation way over here, right? And then begin to, as I said earlier, engineer that approach out with industry input here's how we can best do it, and here's what the government is going to invest in before we actually, again, issue the RFP, so industry knows. Here's kind of the policy or the guidelines that the government's going to put forward before we issue the, industry, we need you to do this. So that we have that kind of laid out, and we've already kind of created the partnership that we're going to work towards, and that's going to make it so much easier. I mean, I've been in these situations before where we rush to the outcome, we rush to the decision, we have a great vision, but we haven't spent the time up front kind of laying out, here's how we're actually going to get there before we're, in that contractual state. And I think that would change things significantly if we can build in those conversations up front, start to think through these things, and have the commitment that we're going to invest in the infrastructure on all sides that's going to make this work.
Excellent. And Dr. Leon, you have the honor of the last point here.
Well, I completely agree about trying to get early, input and whatnot. I do think one of the things that's missing is kind of the overall, the macro architecture of how all of this should fit together. And so again, getting industry input on that, I think, is key. I think we have to think about federated systems and systems that talk to each other, or that where you can transport across. So, some companies want, one cloud solution, but I don't think that's the answer. You need multiple clouds. You need some on-prem. You need some, AWS clouds, some Google Cloud, and you need to be able to transport across. So I think one of the things that I think is holding us back is that macro vision and architecture, and definitely getting industry input to help solve that is key. I do think with the OTTI, operational test and training infrastructure, I think they're trying to do that. I have heard some frustration they're not moving fast enough, but what they have been doing is trying to get that input. So I think OTTI is a great use case, and I think it's a real opportunity for Space Force to create that macro environment.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Okay, well, we are now at the end of this session. I want to thank all of you very much for taking the time today. And for everyone, make no mistake, the next decisive advantage will not come from a single platform. It will come from how fast the United States can design, integrate, and adapt its force. Digital engineering is the engine of that advantage. Treated as a back office function, it delivers incremental gains. Treated as an acquisition weapon system, it compresses timelines, expands options, and outpaces adversaries before conflict ever begins. The choice is simple: continuing buying capability by the speed of process, or deliver combat power at the speed of relevance. Thank you all very much.